Traditional Hindu Tantra has used drugs of various kinds in ritual and for different purposes. Today I want to talk about that and also about the use of psychedelics as spiritual aids from a tantric perspective. So, how does traditional tantra use drugs, and what drugs? Well, one of the noteworthy ones is just alcohol, usually in the form of a native wine, not made from grapes, but probably from palm sugar. And the reason this is noteworthy because alcohol has largely been forbidden to Hindus, and because of, well, the abuses that happen when people drink too much. Mythologically speaking, the god Brahma and also Krishna individually put curses on wine, and therefore it was forbidden. So including it in a tantric ritual is an act of transgression, a transgression against the prohibition. And so Tantra has used various transgressions in order to emphasize that the divine really is in everything, even in forbidden things. And so that's why forbidden things are sometimes included in tantric ritual. Now, for most of the Western world, non-Muslim and non-Hindu world, drinking a little wine or other spirits is not forbidden at all. It's quite, culturally accepted. So it doesn't really function as a transgression in the case of persons who don't consider it a forbidden substance to begin with. The other substance that is used traditionally, not only in tantric ritual but in a variety of Hindu celebrations, is cannabis. And cannabis can be used ground and made into a milkshake, sometimes called bhang or siddhi, depending on where you are in northern India. And it also is smoked in a form that's called ganja, but it's all cannabis. Okay, so in some traditional tantric rituals, a little bit of ground cannabis is put in wine and then imbibed at the beginning, at the outset of the ritual. So what's the purpose there? Aggehananda Bharati, who wrote the tantric tradition and the ochre robe, polyglot, speaker of 15 languages and a scholar of extraordinary accomplishments, both in East and Western disciplines, opined that this use of the intoxicant at the outset of the ritual in moderate quantities, not enough to become senseless, of course, but just enough to move your consciousness a little out of the ordinary range, was used to lower inhibition so that persons who would otherwise be hesitant to engage in transgressive practices like sex with somebody who's not your husband or wife, or the imbibing of other forbidden substances like meat or wine and so on, would lower inhibitions. Okay, so that's one theory. I'm not sure that it's supported within the tradition necessarily, but this is a great scholar and that was his opinion. And also he was a practitioner. Maybe that's how it worked for him. So there's that. But Ramakrishna, the tantric saint of the 19th century, gave a different slant to the use of intoxicants, and basically that ecstatic feeling that comes, that quiet, sweet feeling that comes when you're just a little bit under the influence. Again, not senseless, not out of control, but just a little bit moved from that usual, waking consciousness into this other kind of blissful state, is a reminder of the deeper bliss that comes in meditation and in communion with the divine self. And so that is a function of intoxicants in traditional Hindu Tantra. Now, what about psychedelics? I'm aware, just from meeting a tantrika from Nepal, that he took psychedelic mushrooms with his guru. And as far as I could tell, their purpose was to experience greater bliss, happiness. Again, that same idea. What's important in noting this this traditional tantrics experience, is that the use of the mushroom or other intoxicants, which they also used, was in a spiritual context, in the context of a guru-disciple relationship, in a sacred ashram in the forest, for a particular sacred purpose. And all of that speaks to what Western explorers of psychedelics have concluded is important in the use of psychedelics in any kind of spiritual way, and that is your mindset and the setting in which you take them greatly determines the quality of your experience. So, if we go back, probably one of the most famous Western writers who wrote positively about psychedelics was Aldous Huxley, and his famous paper on that, his experience is The Doors of Perception. Very interesting little book. What a lot of people may not know about Huxley was, prior to his use of mescaline, which was the first psychedelic he used, he had years of intense meditation experience under the guidance of a tantric guru. Now, so he wasn't coming to it cold. It wasn't his first rodeo, so to speak. He already had a lot of mental discipline and experience with inner states before he imbibed that. So for him, mescaline then was eye-opening in a very literal way. Now, one of his friends, also that same generation of British authors, philosophers, who came to America just around the beginning of World War II in Europe, Gerald Hurd, again a disciple of the same Tantra guru, also had positive experiences with psychedelics. But both Huxley and Gerald Hurd agreed that these substances were not suitable for the general public. What they meant is that persons without the proper preparation and mental training wouldn't likely get the positive results from their use. So then we fast forward to Timothy Leary and Richard Alpert, later known as Ram Dass, who believed that, if a little bit is good, then a lot is better, and thought that LSD in particular could awaken the consciousness of a whole generation and change society virtually overnight. So yeah, tune in. What is it? Drop out, and turn on, turn on, and drop out. I forget the phrase. In any case, they advocated a widespread use, and indeed that's what happened. And LSD became a party drug. Now, in a party setting, your mindset and setting are out of control. And so what we found was that stories of LSD's deeper spiritual use or meaning got reduced, and then you hear more of the negative stories of bad trips and so on. Some of those were exaggerated in a period of drug hysteria, but and of course LSD is not a toxic drug, but if people without the proper training or who had psychotic tendencies were to take it, it could definitely create problems for them. So I really attribute to Leary and them the decline in the accessibility, certainly, of psychedelics, and also even though Leary and Alpert both agreed that mindset and setting were important, that advocacy of widespread use wasn't a good idea. It tended to make more problems than it solved. But nevertheless, I've met people, friends of mine, persons who were involved in my own tradition, for instance, who came to a deeper spiritual practice through one or more experiences with psychedelics, mostly LSD and sometimes psilocybin mushrooms. And so you can't discount that there is potential there for some people. So modern writers like James Fadiman, who was a co-researcher with Leary and so on, wrote The Psychedelic Explorer's Guide, which talks about a moderated use of psychedelics for specific purposes. So that's one book that you can look at. Another is a recent book, How to Change Your Mind. Again, a food writer, ironically, has taken up the use of psychedelics just to explore what their potential was for him. And he wrote a book, How to Change Your Mind. It also can be useful for someone curious about all of that. Now, I want to talk just a little bit about my own experience, because I have a little experience with psychedelics, specifically LSD and psilocybin mushrooms, and also a direct experience of the enlightenment through meditation techniques. And so, first of all, the same language can sometimes be used to describe very different things. And when you're talking about something that really transcends language, so there's bliss, there's a sense of oneness, and so on, that could be used to describe both psychedelic experiences and this deeper meditational or enlightenment experience. But qualitatively, the two, for me, were quite different. And to explain the difference, it's a little subtle, and you may not get it. It's almost impossible to understand, I think, unless you've been there, but let me try. Okay, so with psychedelics, I did experience shifts in identity. Identity from this body-mind into other kinds of individual perspectives, sometimes other dimensions, other non-human things. Very profound, because it shakes the idea that we are only this, and that's a good thing to shake, because we are not just only this, we are much more. However, in these spiritual experience, what I call the meditative enlightenment experience, the shift was not from one individual experience to another, but out of the whole concept of individuality. And I don't think it's possible to conceive what that means unless you've been there. And that's part of what makes the enlightenment experience so convincing, because it is so unlike anything else, and so completely overcomes the illusions of this world, that it's a certain way that we think it is normally. Completely blows that out of the water, and you realize that the true self is infinite and undivided and blissful, and that all of these names and forms that we take so seriously most of the time, they come and they go, but that deeper self abides.